How's it going, guys? My name is TIMBUH. We're going to be jumping back into part 2 of episode 1 of EQing, compression, reverb, and saturator. Let's just jump right back into it and we'll start on EQ. I was thinking about that elevator analogy I made earlier in episode 1, part 1. And I never really explained what happens when you start to lift up the elevator. Well, whenever you're overcrowding your mix and you're not EQing properly throughout your mix, you're going to be making your master work a lot harder, and therefore it's going to turn out to be kind of a crappier mix that's not going to translate. Now, so what that means is, for example, I think a lot of new cats, especially, they tend to overemphasize the importance of mastering when it's really not so much mastering than making your mix really good and then kind of letting mastering just doing a little bit of polishing off. So let's kind of go back into that EQ and jump right back into a little bit more specific parameters. So for example, you have these little, they look like, I forgot what those are called, like the slingshots and stuff, or wishbones or whatever. So, and I do want to emphasize that, guys, we're going to be having fun during this series. I'm not crazy educated with all of the terms. I'm going to do my best to explain to you what I know and how I know it. But that being said, don't expect me to really kind of know every single, for example, all of these little things. I know kind of the more important ones, but in exercise I can put it down, but sometimes I just don't know. So just bear along with me. So right here, this is going to be a low cut, or this isn't a much higher low cut right here, but this is also low cut. And don't get it twisted, guys, because this little differentiation right here between those is going to be really pivotal into how the synthesis is being introduced in the EQing and such like that. So this is going to be a low cut, and this is going to be a high cut. And let's just kind of jump right into when you're going to be doing this and how often you're going to be doing this. So let's say, for example, we have a bass group, a bass loop per se, right? I'm just going to throw a random one in there. This is actually a MIDI track. We need to make that. So let's just kind of throw this in here just to kind of see. So in my processing, guys, and I think what a lot of people do, they'll usually say, hey, so this is just my bass group. I do want another sub operating out of that, as its own independent thing, because you'll learn eventually that I think more people who know what they're doing, they'll just keep one channel with the entire sub and everything. It even kind of looks like this sometimes, and they'll boost this and stuff, which I don't advise boosting when you first get started, guys, unless it's a very small boost and very intentional boosts too. So for example, let's say we want to cut out the sub bass from this, and sub bass is going to lie in this region, kind of from 0 to 80 per se. What we're going to do is you're going to usually want to cut that out, but even then you're still leaving a lot of low information by doing this. So what a lot of new cats are doing is that they're going 200, because sub bass technically ends at 200. What I was referring to from 0 to 80, that's just called sub, I believe. So from sub bass, it actually ends at 200. So a lot of new producers will be like, all right, cool, I've got my sub track. Let me just go ahead and quickly copy and paste this on here. So I got my sub track, or I got my bass. I'm going to go ahead and make this my sub and only leave in that EQ. Well, you'll learn that that's okay. And in time, you got to really trust your ears. But don't be afraid to kind of actually, I forgot that they're usually doing this, and they're completely cutting out all frequencies, sub and sub bass. And they're just kind of leaving the mid highs and the highs and the high highs. But even then, I've learned that leaving actually a little bit of that information left and doing it tastefully will actually add like more girth in that region. And this specific region from like 100 to 300, a lot of problems can arise from this region, but at the same time, a lot of mixes can also lack in this region too. So that's just something to know. So let's go down. You obviously want your body. Let's kind of just imagine everything from like 200 to 10K as like the body, right? So it's going to be really like the foundation of your sound. And like, especially out here, this is going to be high cuts. And I see a lot of producers, especially, like, they don't really care. They'll let it go, and they'll just kind of let those frequencies ride in the highs. But I gotta say, like, you really want to be careful when you do that, because remember what I was talking about, like the elevator thing. And let's say like everybody in that elevator is like a really important person, and they're all going to the same work job. Like they're going to an event that they're all working, but they all play a pivotal part. So like when you're letting those highs ride, you're not letting the cymbals and the hi-hats really shine. Cymbals and hi-hats are really going to shine in this 10,000, 19,000 range. And with that being said, like, you really got to trust your ear, but I started out by absolutely high cutting. A little tip that I had a lesson with OG Nixon a few years ago, and he told me that he likes to high cut at like 13,000. So you could definitely do this, because what this is going to do is like, it's going to leave your, and referring back to that, everybody in the elevator is important. Like, let's consider this the body, the body is going to be the girth, the actual foundation. Like, he's going to want to play in his own, he's going to be in his own work area, while the cymbals are going to be over here working. The sub bass and the kick is going to be, they're going to be, and that's another thing, like sub bass and kicks, like tuning that is going to be its own fight in terms of like this region. They're going to be fighting each other. And if you don't kind of have a good foundation of how to sidechain, how to properly mix your kick and bass with tonics, with third or fifth semitone, I believe, of the kick, like tuning your drums too is important. So EQing, really important. Don't overdo it. And I do want to kind of explain EQing in one last thing before we continue. Additive synthesis, subtractive synthesis. This is the boring version of what EQing is actually doing. Whenever you are boosting, you are adding synthesis. Whenever you are cutting, you are subtracting synthesis. So remember, like a lot of samples that you get already, they're already like EQ'd to how they should be, besides the sub and everything. So just be careful with that. But that's kind of how we're going to go into it. Mid-side EQing is a whole other aspect that I kind of want you guys, there's a lot of videos that explain mid-side EQing. I won't go into it, but it is very helpful in your mix. So let's go ahead and continue back to compressor. So once again, going back to this view just because. Now, compressor is going to be, once again, really important to how your song is going to play out. So a good rule of thumb is like, you can always do kind of light compression and just kind of throw this on everything in a way, like -6 threshold, but keep the out at 0. This is going to kind of maintain loudness in your mix. This is going to maintain that your sounds are kind of staying in, but you do want to be careful with this. I will say I'm not too familiar with ratio, attack, and release. What's really cool is that like when you are in Ableton, as you can see, like there's this little info view right here. So it kind of tells you like compression ratio, what it tells you about how it takes to reach maximum compression. But usually you're okay with keeping things at what they are, or for example, you can use the compressor presets in what they have. For example, like control dynamics, peak clipping, full parallel, all these things. So what else do I want to talk about with compressor? I definitely am going to be talking about glue compressor here in a second. I just wanted to see if there's anything else I can kind of talk about. You mainly want to keep it at 100%, but you can always definitely, kind of do halfway or just a little bit of compression. And so let's go ahead and talk about two more things. We're going to talk about actually three more things. Glue compressor is going to be the second. So let's go ahead and pull up that bad boy. Now, glue compressor is really one of my favorites because it's quite easy to use. And as you can see, it acts very similarly to that old compressor. We have the ratio, the attack, the release, we have the range, we have we have like the dry and wet. Now, why glue compressor is a little bit, I think, easier to use and nicer to use is because, well, it glues a little bit better in terms, right? So, like, it's going to be compressing it pretty hard. Once again, we have that threshold. I explained it in my last episode. This is how much sound can be allowed to be loud. And this is kind of the reverse. Now mom is saying, hey, actually, boys and girls, you can be much louder. So glue compressor is going to be really, really, really pushing it in terms of that. So, like, use things very moderately. Remember, small adjustments will make a really great mix. So, keep things like that threshold staying like right there. I would do like maybe -6, same thing like that. Maybe like just 3, just to ensure loudness, right? Because we're making a really loud genre. So I don't know why. I always soft clip. You don't have to soft clip, but Sudden Death talked about it a long time ago in another episode, how he was soft clipping. And in general, soft clip, I think, is what helps kind of make waveforms really nice and fat. So I will always just stick to soft clipping. There is an actual fundamental reason what happens hard clipping versus soft clipping, and I'll talk about that when I talk about limiters. So glue compressor is awesome. There are a lot of presets you can use with glue compressor. Make it loud, gentle. Actually, it was kind of funny because there was a stream that Phase 1 had, and he had a glue compressor, and his exact parameters were basically the make it loud preset, which I thought was funny. So, everything, like, it's not hard, but it is kind of funny to come full circle and realize like how simple things can be. So, definitely use these presets. What's it called? Now let's go ahead and talk about limiting. Now, I do want to apologize here because like I'm not too good with explaining limiting, even though I use fucking limiters all the time. So, like, limiting is essentially a compressor, but on crack. It's a really bad way to explain it. But limiter is going to absolutely push your mix to loudness levels. It's what Skrillex and every single a producer uses to really push the limits of their song. And especially when you combine limiting and clipping, like clipping first and then limiting. Now, what clipping means is that, well, for example, remember when I was talking about the compressor, how mom is going to tell you to not be loud past 0 dB? Well, she's clipping you. You're getting clipped right there. So what this is like with clipping and limiting, what it does is that we can mix and clip a really loud mix, right? But we can still leave some like room for absolute more distortion, and like good distortion, not like, sausage bass, like just horrible bass type. What you're gonna do is you're gonna make it loud, clip it, and then make it even louder, right? So what it's gonna do is like you're really controlling how much you're telling the limiter to work. So limiter does a lot of work, guys. Like, be careful with freaking limiting, because a lot of people, like, make limiters work way too much for their own good. And it's like, I like to use limiters more as like clippers, and then at the very end I will turn up the gain. So limiting is very good. There are a lot of really good videos on explaining limiting too. And then there was one last one I wanted to talk about. Of course, multiband compression, multiband dynamics, and OTT. Because I'm pretty sure they all relate. Oh, that's reduce ambience. So OTT. So multi-band compression. All right, guys. I freaking didn't even tell y'all what the actual like simple meaning of compressor was. I should have said it in episode 1. A compressor is a dynamic shaping tool. That's what I was explaining. All of these parameters, all a compressor is doing is dynamically shaping a sound. Now, what I mean by that is like, remember, going back to EQing, going back to the lows, the mids, the highs, like we are dynamically shaping sounds in all of the spectrum. So let's talk about multiband compression, because now, well, let's say, so now that we know compressor is a dynamic shaping tool, a multiband compressor, what is a multiband compressor? Well, let's just slap multiband on top of the first definition. A multiband compressor is a multiband dynamic shaping tool. So like now instead of a compressor, because like a multiband compressor is actually going to be compressing those bands a lot more accurately than just per se a compressor. So of course you have your highs, your mids, your lows. You have your output. This is your input. This is how much you're inputting. Output. Your time. This is going to be more useful for OTT. I'll go over that in a second. You have your output as well. Now, this is really a really good thing, actually. I want you guys to experiment with multiband dynamics, because you can really help out your mix and kind of like help shape it in ways you want it to be. So let's go over OTT, because it's a little bit more directed towards dubstep. Now, in my opinion, OTT does sound great, but like right off the bat, if you just throw OTT on something, like, and you're not turning it down, or you're not turning this all the way up, like you gotta be careful, because you are really, really, really changing the dynamics to this whenever you just do 100%. So like, especially on vocals and like things that sound a little static, robotic-y, that need a little bit more life, a little bit more high-end, OTT helps a lot. So like definitely OTT on, you know, your bass synths, sometimes your cymbals too. Hell, some people even throw OTT on the whole master, and like they can do that. I tend to not want to stick with that, just because like, remember, I've seen results with the most simplest of processing, and then I've seen crazy results with like the most crazy processing. But like, you know, why make things hard unless you want it to be hard, right? So that goes over compression, kind of things I know over it. Let's go over and talk about reverb. Now, reverb, I'm not going to be able to really explain as much into depth as the other two. So like I was saying in part 1, you know, it's going to be adding space. It's going to be adding a sense of lush in your mix. Now, what you really want to be doing, in my opinion, is only using reverb on return tracks. Now I'm going to do a little bit of a twist on this, right? I'm going to throw return tracks this early on into the series, just because like they're really goated, and I think a lot of people don't know enough about return tracks, so I kind of do want to go over them. So let's go over to this view, right? Okay. You have these over here, but they're not actual channels you'll be working with. They just come with your template. Right click, insert return track. Now let's just throw that reverb on there, right? So what a return track does, so say, right, this is the channel, reverb is C, A, B, C, D, A, B, C, boom. What you're doing there, right, is returns are creating a duplicate of your original audio signal, but it's only duplicating it towards the parameters that you assigned it to. Now, if you understood what I meant, that's really good, because let's go back. Return, reverb, boom. This is a duplicate. Nothing is coming out of this. But unless we tell it to do that, now it's going to be routing this sound. Say like we don't even have a reverb right here, right? We're routing this sound, boom, to the reverb. Now the reverb is returning it, boom. So what this is gonna do, especially with like reverb in your mix, and remember how I was telling you it's really easy to kill a mix with reverb, is like when you're only letting your reverb be on return tracks. Like in my opinion, you're able to control how much it's in your mix and how much it's messing up your mix, or if it's not messing it up. So you don't want to be throwing random reverbs on all these different channels, because you're going to have different spaces, different times, and I promise you it's not going to be good. So there's plate reverb, there's hall reverb. Like, guys, use these presets you have over here. Like, for example, what I will do, especially like small room reverb, and then I will automate this. By automating it, I mean like I'll only let certain times of it be like, for example, quarter notes. Wop, 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 wop. You know, one way of doing things, or you could keep it consistent and just keep it like in the background. So reverb, really important. Definitely throw it on those return tracks. Now let's go on to Saturator, because Saturator is really cool. And there's so many different plugins for all these four things, guys, that you can get outside of Ableton, like Fab Filter, for EQ, for Compressor. I'll usually just stick with, you know, with the third-party compressors. I'll go with like G-Clip or K-Clip, even though those are technically limiters. For reverb, there's like Valhalla, there's Valhalla Vintage, you know, there's like so many different ones. But I'm telling you, the ones that Ableton give you are always really good too. So now with Saturator as well, like Saturator, once again, introducing harmonics into a sound, you know, and you definitely want to be careful, because guys, like, I don't know if people realize, but like Ableton is chained. Like, for example, let's say this mouse right here, like legitimately, let's look at the mouse. That's my sound. All right, so the mouse is getting saturated, and then it's getting EQ'd. That's correct, because when you saturate, you're going to be introducing harmonics, and say you had it like this, and you're like, all right, cool, this is how I want my sound to be. Well, when you saturate that shit, and you introduce that here, and you turn this back there, you're actually gonna have things like information still out here, because you're introducing new harmonics. Remember that, guys. Perceived loudness, introducing new harmonics, making it louder thus. So be careful with how your chain is. Like, you really got to be careful. So usually have your EQ at the end always whenever you're compressing, saturating, all of that stuff. So a saturator does work similarly to a compressor, because it's increasing the volume, especially if you just kind of go like this. Now, what's awesome about Saturator is that I really want you guys to be experimenting with Saturator. Like, you know, make the output -7, make this the input 7, because what this is going to do is it's going to save, I think, digital peak information on your Ableton. It's going to help your Ableton work less and essentially on that. So, you know, 7, and that's kind of the same thing with like limiting 2, is like you can make the input 7 and make the output -7 too. So Saturator, you know, you have here, use your width. You also have these presets too. Warm up the highs, warm up the lows. There's a really good third-party saturator that like Saturn, that is really good. It kind of has a lot of good parameters to that. And so I you know, I'm sorry I didn't tell you guys too much about Saturator, but I was reading a video that, what's it called, analog clip and sinoid fold are like the only algorithms that kind of keep the saturation, I don't know how to directly say this, at bay, because soft sine is really loud, medium curve is really loud, hard curve is really loud. So that's another thing to kind of go off on. I think that kind of does it for what I wanted to talk about Saturator. I probably could talk about more things. I don't want my episodes to be too long because, just to keep everyone on board. But right about does it, guys. Let me know if you have any questions or comments. I'm always here to answer. And I also do mentoring too if you guys want to do lessons with me. But that kind of concludes it for this episode, and I hope you guys enjoyed it.